Hi, folks. This is Don Meisner with the North Country Fishing Report. And I want to talk about something that I think it almost gets a negative connotation in fishing as we speak about when fish spawn. And we have a very strong feeling in this area to protect our bass, our smallmouth bass, more than anything, our smallmouth bass, because in the time of the year when they spawn, which is the spring, they're the most vulnerable. They come into the shallow water. They will strike anything at that time. First of all, if they need the food, if they need that nutrients to help them to be in their full strength for spawning, but also to protect their beds. And, I think of other species, and I didn't know if a lot of you realize that while most species tend to spawn in the spring, that time of a new life starting, a rebuilding, that's how we think of the spring in our four seasons, is a time of rebirth. But some species spawn in the fall. And remember, spawning puts any type of species in a state of vulnerability. It makes it easier for us to catch, and especially catch the really big ones. Well, in the fall, salmon spawn. And we know that they become so vulnerable because their whole instinct is to fulfill the spawning drive that's within them. But there's other trout and salmon species that spawn in the fall. Lake trout spawn in the fall. They'll spawn out in deeper water along rocky islands or bars or so forth. But a lot of times in certain areas like Lake Ontario, they're protected during this time because we know they're terribly vulnerable. Right now, there's runs of salmon that are starting. I shouldn't say runs, pods of salmon that are starting to move into, for example, the Salmon River. But what's really surprising is brown trout are moving in at the same time because brown trout also spawn in the fall. Domestic rainbow trout have been sort of governed or directed by biologists. And let me back up from that. Rainbow trout, we think of rainbows, but steelhead are also rainbow trout, but they travel. They're constantly moving to go into tributaries. Regular rainbow trout, and I hate to use these general terms because a biologist would be more specific, but regular rainbow trout look the same, are the same in every respect, except they're far more domestic. They don't try to leave an area that they're in. Well, they've sort of directed them to spawn in the fall. Steelhead will spawn in the spring. But again, I felt this was really important because you have to understand that in those times when any species spawn, they indeed are the most vulnerable. People talk to me about the only time they see great big northern pike, people holding them up with smiles for a camera to show what they've caught, are basically in the winter. Because those great big northern pike that are unavailable most of the year because they go deep and they're very wary and they may not feed as often as some of the smaller fish do. But in the wintertime, when it's time to prepare for spawning, they come into the shallows and they're so vulnerable to be caught. And so I guess my lesson for this week is that spawning time can be a tremendous time for fishermen, but they can be a very, very dangerous time for the fish that we're going after. Until next time, folks, this is Don Meisner with the North Country Fishing Report.